They were a strike force of different, daring, dangerous men who had to work together or die. From Alistair MacLean's monumental bestseller, Force 10 from Navarone, they were outnumbered 10,000 to 1. That made the odds just about even. Robert Shaw, Harrison Ford, Barbara Bach, Edward Fox, Franco Nero, Carl Weathers, Richard Jaws Kiel. Force 10 from Navarone, rated PG, parental guidance suggested.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're going to catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hello, I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And this is the American International Podcast. Our mission this week is the movie Force 10 from Navarone from 1978.
Force 10 from Navarone was directed by Guy Hamilton from a screenplay by Robin Chapman and an uncredited George MacDonald Fraser, which itself came from a story by Carl Foreman. And this is all based on the novel Force 10 from Navarone by Alistair MacLean. And it was produced by Oliver A. Unger for Navarone Productions.
Force 10 from Navarone stars Robert Shaw as Major Keith Mallory, Harrison Ford as Lieutenant Colonel Mike Barnsby, Edward Fox as Staff Sergeant John Miller, Barbara Bach as Marina Petrović, Franco Nero as Captain Lescovar / Colonel von Ingolsleben, a German intelligence officer, Carl Weathers as Sergeant Olen Weaver, Richard Kiel as Captain Dražak, Alan Badel as Major Petrović.
Also appearing are Michael Byrne as Major Schroeder, Philip Latham as Commander Jensen, Angus MacInnes as Lieutenant Doug Reynolds, Michael Sheard as Sergeant Bauer, Peter Butnick as Marco, Paul Humpelitz as Sergeant Bismarck, and Ramiz Pazik as Mallory's boy.
Force 10 from Navarone opens with snippets from the movie The Guns of Navarone, which contains a couple of the same characters, although this movie is not a straight sequel of The Guns of Navarone. And to sum it up, deep in the heart of the Aegean Sea, there's an island. It's named Navarone. In 1943, the Germans controlled the island, using it to fire their massive guns on Allied forces' ships. A group of Brits infiltrated the island and were able to blow up the Germans' artillery, destroying their strategic advantage. The leaders of this crew were named Miller and Mallory, and they were then rescued by the British Navy. And now on to their new adventure.
Then the credits start on the AIP version, which we watched. These credits are shown over various photos of war times. In the international version, it's just over a generic background. And the main credit difference is that the domestic version begins with the words, Samuel Z. Arkoff presents. So once the credit sequence is done, we find ourselves somewhere in England, 1943, according to the next title card. We see Major Keith Mallory. He's walking with a cane, and he's being escorted to see Commander Jensen. On the way, he bumps into his old colleague John Miller, who has also been summoned to this meeting.
Miller tells Mallory that he's been working on a new type of detonator since he's been retired from the Army. In Commander Jensen's office, Jensen says that he needs Mallory and Miller for something special. He shows them a picture and asks them to identify one of the men pictured. This is a traitor who betrayed them at Navarone, this being the first movie. His name is Nikolai, and they assumed he had been shot, but that turns out to not be the case. Nikolai escaped. Not only that, he was a German agent who's now operating in Yugoslavia, working with the pro-Allied partisans, posing as a man called Captain Lescovar.
Because Mallory and Miller are the only ones who would be able to positively identify him, they are the ones that will be assigned to assassinate him.
Whether they want to or not.
Miller objects. He's a civilian now, but Jensen informs him not anymore. He's back with a promotion. He is now Staff Sergeant.
Not only that, Mallory and Miller are going to be tagging along with something called Force 10, an Allied mission going to Yugoslavia as well. Force 10's mission is on a need-to-know basis, and Jensen says that Mallory and Miller don't need to know that.
Lieutenant Colonel Barnsby enters. He is the leader of Force 10, and Jensen asks him if Force 10 is ready. Barnsby looks kind of sideways at the others in the room and is reluctant to answer, but Jensen assures him he's free to speak freely, as these men will be tagging along on the mission. And Barnsby protests, with all due respect, but this mission will be a difficult one, and his men are all young and in shape. Jensen assures him that these men are capable and experienced.
Jensen tells them that they're going to leave for Italy at 2300 hours, and from there they're going to fly to Yugoslavia. Barnsby is to deliver Miller and Mallory to the partisans. Mallory promises not to make a nuisance of himself. And now we're on the way. Mallory and Miller are riding in the back of a truck with all of Barnsby's crew members. Looking out the window, they see the Termoli air base. They're now in Italy, but they pass it. Miller turns to Mallory and says, "I thought we were going to an airfield." But Barnsby and the truck keep going.
Finally, they park near a chain link fence, and Force 10 gets to work cutting the chain link fence as Barnsby explains to Mallory and Miller that the last 3 missions to Yugoslavia were blown right there in Italy, so this time when they fly out, they're not advertising it. But just then, a jeep full of military police drives by and they see these intruders. They jump out of the car and try to take control of the situation. One soldier is left with the jeep to guard their prisoner, Carl Weathers.
The large crew of MPs try to round up Barnsby's men, but they fight back, as does the MP's prisoner. He introduces himself to Miller and Mallory, who are not fighting, as Sergeant Weaver, U.S. Army Medical Corps. Eventually, Barnsby's men prevail and are readying for takeoff. They did lose one man, Nolan, but they have to get going anyways.
As the plane fires up, the door opens and Weaver bursts in, slamming the plane's door behind him. He says he saved them all back there, so what's the big idea leaving without him? I guess since they're a man short, they're willing to let him stay.
The men, discussing Weaver, sarcastically say that he'll blend right in Yugoslavia and ask him if he knows how to work a parachute. Weaver says he'll learn on the way down. Miller opens his case of explosive wonders.
This causes a little concern since no one really knows why he's there with them, but Miller tells them all not to worry. He's been using this stuff ever since he blew up the nursery with his first chemistry set. Poor old Nanny.
So they fly on, but it's not long before they encounter a squadron of German planes, which fire upon them. Inside the plane, a lot of the men are getting hit, and now the engines are in flames. Barnsby is piloting, so he doesn't have any idea what's going on in the back of the plane. These planes being not very well reinforced, almost all of the men are dead. Of the men in the back, the only ones still alive are Miller and Mallory, Sergeant Weaver, and Lieutenant Reynolds. They shoot up and prepare to jump out of the plane.
That's exactly what I wrote too.
They CHUT up and jump out of the plane. Barnsby makes a quick check of his men to see if any are still alive. They're not. He jumps out as well. Miller is the last to go, and just before he jumps out, he drops a small explosive device on the floor of the plane. It rolls around for a little bit and then detonates, taking the rest of the plane with it.
German soldiers are watching the battle from the ground. Then they move out to capture any survivors. Now on the ground, Barnsby, Reynolds, and Mallory reunite quickly. They start looking for the others, and they find Miller with his parachute hanging from a tree. But one of the German soldiers is scouting nearby, so they can't do anything about it. Reynolds raises his gun, but Barnsby has him lower it. The noise would attract attention they don't want.
The German who's nearby where Miller is hanging sees the case, and then finally looks up. He's about to shoot Miller, and the other 3 watching hold their fire for some reason. At the last second, we see a knife lodged in the back of that soldier, and Weaver is there. He grabs the knife and continues to stab that German soldier. Barnsby wonders how he got there. He had no idea Weaver was even on the plane.
Mallory tells him that he believes that this man invited himself. That melee now over, Reynolds asks Weaver where he learned to handle a knife like that, to which Weaver replies, "Harvard man." Barnsby tells him he's not to refer to him as man, but he will address him as sir.
Barnsby orders the men to move on for their own safety. A short while later, Barnsby stops to check his compass. Reynolds asks where they are. Barnsby says if they keep going east, they'll get where they're going. He tells Miller and Mallory to stop slowing them down.
Continuing on foot, it's not long before they're spotted by 2 men with bandages over their faces. The bandaged men jump out from their hiding places, along with a large group of other men, all armed. Barnsby tells his men to be cool. One of the group comes forward to meet the soldiers. This is Dražak. He explains that these men wear bandages because their faces were introduced to German flamethrowers.
Flammenwerfers.
And then he goes on to introduce Maritza. Maritza is the only woman among these men. He next goes over to greet Weaver. "Hello, Blackie," he says. Dražak tries to wipe the color off Weaver's face. When that doesn't work, he pulls out a knife and presses it to Weaver's face.
He's going to carve it off. Weaver's had enough. He kicks Dražak in the shin and simultaneously relieves him of his knife. Dražak goes down. Barnsby tells Weaver to back down, and Maritza says something to Dražak in Serbo-Croatian. No subtitles for us. Dražak gets up and laughs heartily.
"I play big joke, but joke on me."
Weaver gives him his knife, handle first, and everyone's friends now.
So now Barnsby, Mallory, Miller, Reynolds, and Weaver are being escorted to the partisan camp.
On the way to the camp, Weaver objects to the way he was treated, and Barnsby tells him to chill out. Mallory gives Barnsby his condolences on losing all but 2 of his men, if you count Weaver. Mallory says his mission is still on, but it's not going to be very easy for Barnsby to do his, whatever it is.
Barnsby, Mallory, Miller, Reynolds, and Weaver are being escorted to the partisan camp, led by Dražak and Maritza. The townsfolk all seem delighted to see the arrival of the Allied forces. They're escorted into an office where they come face to face with several German soldiers.
Oh no.
Dražak pins a badge to his hat and laughs. We're Chetniks, not stinking partisans. We work with Germans. They're our friends. And outside, all of the Chetniks are laughing and turning their hats around to reveal their true loyalties.
Dražak is pushing the men around roughly, declaring that the Germans are their real BFFs. Major Schroeder introduces himself to the men. Mallory seems quite chuffed to meet him, and Major Schroeder is surprised to be greeted so chummily. Mallory says that they're not soldiers, they're deserters. Miller, who has no poker face, gives Mallory the what face?
Mallory goes on to explain that they were being held in Termali. They escaped, stole a plane, flew out of there, and were shot down, but were fortunate enough to have been brought here. The Major decides to humor them and asks why they deserted. Mallory makes up a story about how they stole a suitcase full of penicillin and plan to sell it on the black market.
He asks Major Schroeder if he's ever heard of penicillin, but he hasn't. Mallory explains that it stops wounds getting infected, as well as some of your nastier social diseases. And their supply could be worth $500,000 on the black market. And then they explain Weaver's presence by saying that he's their provider.
The Major is amused, but not convinced. He'd like to see this penicillin. Mallory tells Miller to go ahead and open the case, but Miller refuses, saying there's £500,000 of that stuff and it's got to be opened under laboratory conditions. Mallory says the Major isn't interested in the penicillin and he just wants to know if they're telling the truth, but Miller refuses to open the case. Barnsby tells the Major that every word of the story is true and he can verify it with his sources in Italy, and Major Schroeder says he plans to do just that.
The next time we see the men, they're being shoved into a tiny cramped prison cell by a growling Dražak.
Barnsby says that was a cute story back there, but what happens when they open that suitcase? Mallory supposes they'll all be shot.
Major Schroeder returns to his quarters, but he's not alone there. Maritza is taking a bath in the Major's bathtub. Major Schroeder asks her opinion. She says they're lying, killed them. Schroeder fantasizes about what the two of them could do with all that money, and she climbs onto his lap naked. She tells him once again, they're lying, kill them. And then they kiss.
The next morning, our heroes are escorted from their cell to be executed.
They all march to a nice place for a firing squad, and Mallory quips that at least they had a good night's sleep.
They're lined up for this execution, but Schroeder comes out and says that their intelligence has verified their story. He takes Barnsby and Mallory back to his office.
Barnsby and Mallory leave the others standing in front of that firing squad. Inside the office, Major Schroeder explains that he did open the case, only to find this, and then he reveals that it's full of firewood.
Firewood.
Major Schroeder and Maritza look pretty angry.
Mallory explains they buried and hid the penicillin before the Chetniks picked them up. It was the only thing he had to bargain with after all. But Schroeder is going to give them a chance to prove themselves by digging up this penicillin. Mallory says if they do that, he'd shoot them and bury them in the same hole, and Schroeder assures him that he will surely shoot them if they don't. Regardless, the choice is theirs. So Mallory and Barnsby are being escorted by Maritza and 3 German soldiers to wherever they allegedly buried the penicillin.
With a shovel and a pick, Mallory, Miller, and their escorts hike through the Alps, pretending to be looking for the spot where they buried the penicillin.
Mallory and Barnsby are themselves puzzled as to how the firewood got into the suitcase. They're not sure exactly what to do. They're unlikely to find any penicillin out here.
Finally, Maritza's had enough. She tells Barnsby and Mallory to start digging in 5 minutes. Either they can dig for the penicillin or they can dig their own graves.
They walk a little further, then decide that this is the place. Mallory points out a pile of rocks and claims it's their marker. Barnsby and Mallory begin moving the rocks, quietly discussing that if they can get the soldiers closer, they can use the spades on them. They start to dig. After a moment, they call out, "Here it is, come look!" The soldiers approach, and as Barnsby and Mallory start to swing their spades, machine gun fire rings out, and Barnsby and Mallory hit the ground. Maritza calls out, "You can get up now, they're dead."
Mallory and Barnsby are very surprised.
As she's disarming the dead soldiers, she explains that she's the one that replaced their explosives with firewood.
Maritza says they can go, but first they have to hit her to make their escape seem plausible. Barnsby punches her lightly, and then Mallory finishes the job by clocking her and sending her to the ground.
Stopping for a brief rest, Barnsby asks, "What about Reynolds and Miller?" "What about them?" says Mallory. They travel on and soon realize they're being followed. It's the 2 bandaged Chetniks. Mallory and Barnsby disappear over a hill and a shot rings out. The Chetniks run up the hill to see Mallory lying down on the ground. One of the Chetniks goes to investigate while the other covers him from the top of the hill. As the Chetnik approaches Mallory, Barnsby jumps out from behind a rock and shoots the Chetnik dead, then the other before he realizes what is happening. Mallory pushes the dead man off him and, sitting up, says, "Next time, you can be the corpse."
So they're walking on again, and then they hear the pounding of hooves. There's an army coming on the horses, but this time it's the partisans, finally. With them is Captain Lescovar. He orders his men to tie Mallory and Barnsby up. He puts them on horseback, and everyone heads towards the partisan base.
He tells them they've just made an appointment with Major Petrović. As they're riding, Mallory tells Barnsby that the leader of this group is Nikolai Lescovar, the man he's been sent to kill.
Later they all stop at a spot overlooking the river and the bridge that crosses it. Of the bridge, Barnsby says, if this is the one he's thinking of, then he knows where they are. Barnsby and Mallory get their heads bagged as partisans frog-march them to the mouth of the cave that is the partisans' HQ office. All the while, partisans are practicing with munitions and artillery. Very loud in the distance.
They are brought before Major Petrović, who immediately begins questioning them. If they escaped from the Germans, as they say, why weren't they being followed by Germans? They had been tracking them for 5 miles before they were picked up. Barnsby says, then you should have seen us take care of those 2 Chetniks following us. Petrović says, them? They were partisans who had infiltrated the Chetnik camp and were working as agents on the inside. Emphasis on were.
Now that their double agents are dead, they have no way to communicate with their agent who's still remaining in the camp.
Barnsby says he's sorry, but that doesn't change the fact that they are Allied soldiers and shouldn't be treated this way. He tells Petrović they're from Force 10 and he should have gotten a memo about them.
They're supposed to deliver them to Marshal Tito's office.
Petrović had gotten this memo, and he knows that Mallory is on a different mission. He asked Mallory just what that is, but Mallory says he would prefer to tell him in private and not in mixed company, seeing that Nikolai, the man he was sent to kill, is standing over Petrovic's shoulder. Petrović tells him there are no secrets in the People's Army and he should speak freely. So he does. Mallory says that he was sent to eliminate an agent named Nikolai, going by the name of Lescovar. Upon hearing this news, Petrović laughs. He tells Mallory there was an agent called Nikolai, who also used the name Lescovar, but he was taken care of months ago, and the British should have received a memo on that. Lots of memos going around. Later, Barnsby and Mallory are outside. Barnsby is shaving, and Lescovar comes up. He says, hey, no hard feelings about wanting to kill me. We all get badly briefed sometimes. Barnsby mumbles that he wishes he had been briefed about those 2 non-Chetniks.
Mallory asks if their agent in the camp is Maritza, and Lescovar confirms that it is, and informs them that she's Petrovic's daughter. Lescovar then shows them the bridge. The Germans are due to cross it soon, and that can't happen. Barnsby asks why they haven't blown it up themselves, and Lescovar says they've tried it, but they have lost good men in the process.
Barnsby says there's not a bridge that can't be blown. That's what Force 10 is here to do.
Now we're back at the partisan HQ, deep in the heart of that cave. Barnsby's talking to Petrović. He asks for men to help him blow up the bridge, but Petrović says he's just going to blow 20 men to hell for nothing. Mallory says they don't need 20 men. Miller will suffice.
And goes on to explain that Miller is the best demolitions expert in all of Britain, and he happens to be in town, though he's a prisoner in the Chetnik camp. Petrovic's interest had been piqued, but he deflates at this last bit of news. Then he's already dead, he says. Not necessarily, says Barnsby. Mallory asks for just 2 men so they can go find out.
We head back to the Chetnik camp. Inside a prison block, Miller, Weaver, and Reynolds are indeed still alive. Major Schroeder comes into the cell where they're shackled against the wall. He brings with him 3 Nazi interrogators. One of the Nazis gripes that they were told there were 5 prisoners. Major Schroeder tells the Nazis that 2 escaped, or tried to, and were shot in the process.
This is news to Miller, Reynolds, and Weaver, who hadn't heard anything of this.
At the gate to the Chetnik camp, 2 bandaged Chetniks present themselves with their 2 prisoners, Mallory and Barnsby. They bring their prisoners into Major Schroeder's office, but he's not there. There's another officer fussily berating the Chetniks for being where they ought not to be. But as he's futzing with his milk in a saucepan and complaining that they made him burn the milk, Mallory calmly apologizes and then says, "Let it burn."
The officer looks up to see the 2 masked Chetniks, and Mallory and Barnsby all have guns trained on him. Next, we see the officer is being marched out by Mallory and Barnsby and the 2 bandaged men. As they walk across the camp, Maritza sees them out the window and, recognizing Mallory and Barnsby, realizes that her cover has been blown. When they reach the detention area, the officer announces he has prisoners for Major Schroeder. They're brought into the cell where Miller, Reynolds, and Weaver are being held. Weaver takes a punch to the gut for not answering questions to the satisfaction of the interrogators. Their arrival is announced, and one of the interrogators says, "I thought you said these men had been shot." Barnsby and Mallory expose their guns, and one of the bandaged men rips off his mask. It's Lescovar.
We see Maritza in her quarters, pulling something out of the ceiling where she had concealed it. As she was the one who swapped out the contents of the case with firewood, we now know what happened to Miller's equipment.
Then we see Dražak and several other Chetniks are returning to the camp on horseback.
In the prison, all the Nazis have been trussed up by the now free Miller, Weaver, and Reynolds. All the men are ready to leave, but they left one German unbound, the officer with the warm milk fetish. For some reason, Mallory placed one of the Nazis' guns in reach of this officer. He aims it at the Navarone crew. He's not very assured as he says, "This is not correct?" He glances at an alarm on the wall. Reynolds jumps the officer. They struggle with the gun between them. The gun goes off. Reynolds has been hit. Before this officer can make any more trouble, Barnsby shoots him.
One of the shackled Germans still has a gun on him, and Lescovar blasts all 3 chained Germans with machine gun fire. The gunfire attracts more German guards. The remains of Force 10 stand and wait. As the Germans approach, Force 10 shoots them all down, except for one who retreats down the hallway.
Barnsby, Miller, and the rest slowly leave the cell, with Major Schroeder bound and gagged. He's their prisoner. As they turn a corner, the remaining guard takes a shot, but he hits Schroeder, not any of the Navarone men. He's soon killed by Lescovar. Mallory shows Barnsby that Schroeder's dead.
All those targets, and he only managed to shoot his own superior.
Is that what he says?
No, that's what I said.
Okay.
Dražak has gone to Maritza's and is beating her up. "Partisan witch! You were always so kind to the men with burns. They have no burns."
Somehow, Dražak knows that the 3 prisoners have escaped after killing the Germans, although I don't know how you would know that. A little boy comes in to report something to Dražak, but he only speaks Serbo-Croatian. And again, there's no subtitles, so we have no idea what was said.
He seems to be telling him of the in-progress jailbreak, but he already knows about it.
Some of the timelines in this movie are a little jumbled.
Barnsby, Mallory, Miller, and Weaver, and their partisan companion, the other man under bandages who will be revealed as Marco, drag the dead Major Schroeder out to a jeep and prop him up in a seat as Dražak and the boy approach and enter the prison.
Barnsby then gets into a supply truck driven by Mallory. Miller and Weaver presumably are in the back of that truck.
They make a pit stop to collect the now compromised Maritza. They find her unconscious on the bed, so they gather her up inside a blanket and carry her out to the truck.
Both vehicles head towards the gate. Lescovar's driving the jeep with the dead major sitting in the back seat. In the truck, we have Miller, Mallory, Weaver, Reynolds, and Marco, and the prisoners are hiding in the back. As the jeep goes through the gate, Barnsby, crouched on the back floor of the jeep, acts as puppet master for the dead Schroeder, making him give a Heil Hitler salute on the way out by grabbing his elbow and flapping his arm. They have escaped, but Dražak sounds the alarm.
Now it's daylight, and Force 10 is pushing the jeep, still containing the dead Major Schroeder, down a hill. Barnsby orders everyone into the truck, but Weaver isn't budging. He has a machine gun and says that this truck isn't moving, not until someone tells him what's going on. Mallory asks him if his problem is he wants to be part of the team. Weaver says he doesn't want to be part of any team. A group of Chetniks is riding toward them, but Weaver still doesn't care. So Mallory tells him what's what. They're going to help the partisans blow up a bridge. A bridge? What bridge? Nah, Weaver, he's not blowing up a bridge. Barnsby says that's why they came back for Miller. But now Weaver's upset that they came back for Miller and not for him. You didn't come back for me, did you? Barnsby confirms, no, we didn't. We see the Chetniks are getting closer, and Dražak is leading them. Weaver lowers his gun and smiles. That's the first straight answer you've given me, he says.
Barnsby orders Weaver to get in the truck and chauffeur them, but the truck won't start, of course. So they do the next best thing. They assemble outside a rocky pass and take position. The Chetniks won't be able to get through without getting fired upon. However, Miller's not with them. One shot is fired, but then there's an explosion. Falling rocks hit the pass, forcing the Chetniks back the way they came. Surprise! It was Miller and his magic case to the rescue. Weaver fixes the truck, and they're off again.
They return to the partisan camp, and Miller is evaluating the bridge through binoculars as Barnsby and Mallory await his assessment. Miller says that equipment is to be dropped from Britain, but it won't be enough to do any damage to this bridge, which is well fortified into the rock. Barnsby argues that the top engineers have examined the situation and have assured him that this bridge will blow. Miller says that engineers are exceptional at building things, but he's an expert at blowing things up, and he says this bridge isn't going to go down easily.
Mallory has a think, and then asks Miller what would happen if the central arch was suddenly hit by several million tons of water. Water? Miller and Barnsby ask. Mallory reminds them of the dam they passed about 2.5 miles away, and Miller says, now you're talking. The water will be working for them. Blowing that dam will be like pulling a bathtub plug. So the men go off on this new mission.
Now it's night, and we find ourselves at the pre-designated drop site near the partisan camp. Miller is there briefing Weaver of the plan as Barnsby and Mallory wait for the equipment drop. Mallory asks Lescovar if they've used this site for many drops, and Lescovar replies that the Germans don't allow that and admits they have to move around a lot.
Back with Miller and Weaver, they're bounding over their shared rank. Both sergeants. Maritza walks past and they ask her to shelter with them to take a load off and enjoy the supply drop. She says sitting is the one thing she can't do right now and says she's going to bed. We hear a plane approaching as the partisans, there's several of them, light torches to help guide it in, making a makeshift runway.
Maritza is walking through the woods on her way back to the partisan headquarters when she hears someone speaking in German, radioing the approaching plane. Maritza steps on a twig and the speaker looks up. It's Lescovar. Maritza runs. At the drop site, the men with torches make easy targets for the passing plane, and it shoots them all down. In the chaos, Lescovar shoots Maritza in the back as she's running away to inform the others of what she has seen.
Now everything is being lit up by the Germans. Buildings, people, fields, but our 4 guys are okay.
Barnsby looks out at the carnage and says this was no accident. And then Lescovar returns, carrying the dead body of Maritza.
He's weeping crocodile tears. Now we're in the cave with Major Petrović. He's sitting down, and he looks stunned. Lescovar is railing against the Allies and their lack of security. A real masterclass in acting here. But Petrović doesn't want to hear any more lamentations about his dead daughter. He says the Germans will marshal their tanks and cross the bridge tomorrow, and there's nothing they can do about it. However, it's not really going to be tomorrow, as we'll find out.
He informs Barnsby that the 4 of them have outstayed their usefulness, and Petrović orders Lescovar to have them escorted out of the camp.
Miller offers to leave some nasty surprises for the approaching Germans, but Petrović says they've had enough surprises. It's now the next day. No Germans have crossed that bridge yet. Miller's complaining that if he had half of the Germans' landmines, explosives, etc., he'd make Swiss cheese of that dam. When Lescovar delivers his 2-man escort, Marco being one of them, Mallory asks for more men. They're going to raid that German forward supply dump for gear. Lescovar says that none of them speak German well enough to get in, so they're going to need him to help. Mallory thanks him for volunteering.
So the group crosses the river by extending a line from one end to the other, and they go hand over hand across.
Now it's night again. Supply trucks are moving out. We see that they're all passing over a strand of wire laying across the road. And then the wire goes taut. A luckless German officer, riding with the upper half of his body poking up from the parapet of a tank, gets beheaded by that wire. Cool.
The vehicle comes to a halt, and the next thing we see is Force 10 donning German uniforms. Except for Weaver, he would have a difficult time infiltrating the German camp, so he doesn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, he gets to stay behind. Lescovar says that they'll return in 35 minutes, which I think is pretty optimistic.
Now they've made their way into the camp. Lescovar is mingling with Germans, and Miller and Mallory have gone into the forward supply dump to find the explosives they'll need. They find them, but a German soldier starts chattering at them. Miller flips him the bird, which only makes the German angrier. Miller finishes piling boxes on a dolly before he and Mallory storm off, leaving the shouting German behind them.
And Miller gives him such a look. Lescovar waits impatiently outside as a troop truck is loaded behind him. Once he sees Miller and Mallory, he directs them to the pickup point, but Barnsby and the truck aren't there yet. Miller doesn't want to stand around like ducks in thunder, whatever that means. So Lescovar tells them they should hide in a railway car, them and the gear. Inside, Miller starts going over the loot that he has.
We see that Barnsby and Marco have commandeered a truck as a getaway vehicle, but as they approach the train, it starts to move. Weaver pokes his head out from the back of the truck. Where have they gotten off to, he asks. Barnsby and Marco are surprised to see him, and Marco steps out to have a look around.
That train didn't move very far, though. Now it's stopped, and Mallory, looking out the window, sees the truck. Lescovar offers to inform Barnsby and Marco where Mallory, Miller, and the gear are. A soldier comes up to Barnsby's truck and sends it away. So Barnsby has to pull up ahead and out of view.
From the train car, Mallory is watching the proceedings and reporting them to Miller, who is still busy preparing his equipment. Lescovar goes to the German soldier and tells him his true identity. He is a high-ranking German officer, and he has 2 British officers in a train car, and he just sent away a truck with an American colonel. Lescovar wants to capture them all together. Mallory reports that Lescovar seems to be making up a story to tell the soldier.
As Miller continues to play with his explosives.
Lescovar instructs the German soldier to assemble a squad and surround them.
Barnsby moves the truck back into position. He opens up the train compartments and chastises Miller for not picking up his toys. They all work together to refill the trunk full of explosives. But as they leave, they see that German who assembled the backup squad. Lescovar is with them and offers to deal with him again, telling Mallory, Miller, and the rest to wait there.
Lescovar tells the sergeant that they're all his and to go ahead and bring his squad around. Then Lescovar goes back and places a lock on the door of the train car.
Before the Germans can return, the train starts up to Lescovar's alarm. Then we see Marco, who had been lurking near the train.
He's coming after the squad armed with a machine gun, and he chases and takes out the entire squad, or so he thought. One of them isn't dead and sits up and shoots Marco in the back. Lescovar runs to the train car, unlocks it, and joins the others.
He does struggle with that lock, though.
He tells them that Marco must have given himself away.
Weaver wonders where they're going. Miller guesses Berlin, but Lescovar says Sarajevo, no stops. Barnsby offers his condolences on Marco, and Lescovar starts in on how he was such a good friend, blah, blah, blah. Then Lescovar's web of lies starts to unravel. Barnsby asks why the Germans saluted him. He's wearing a corporal's uniform. That's not how it works in the German army. And Mallory notes that he didn't mention that this train rolls past the dam, within a half-mile of it.
Lescovar tries to shrug this off. Just because a sergeant salutes me and I didn't mention a map and I have the same name as the guy you were sent here to kill because he was a traitor, you think I'm a traitor? Mallory doesn't think. He knows.
He just couldn't prove it until now. Mallory says, "You're Nikolai. You're the man who blew us in Greece." Lescovar smiles and nods and gets shot. Barnsby shoots him in the side. Lescovar spins around and manages to cry real tears for once. Mallory thanks Barnsby, and Barnsby says, "I've done your job. Now help me do mine."
It is now daylight, and Barnsby, Mallory, Miller, and Weaver jump from the moving train as it passes through a tunnel.
Gear and all.
By the time they make it to the dam, it is dark. Barnsby looks at his watch. It's nearly 4:30 a.m. The Germans are expected to cross the bridge at 5:30, so that gives them 30 minutes to get in, set the explosives, and 20 minutes to get out.
Miller tells Barnsby that they need a diversion, so he sets off a few fireworks out of a flare gun. The patrolling officers on top of the dam see the display and ooh and ah. Part one of the distraction worked. We next see Mallory and Barnsby climbing up the fortress-like exterior of the dam. Then Miller starts a real conflagration across the gorge. This attracts a lot of German attention. Troops go running off, and the men remaining are shooting at or looking in the direction of Miller's display. Mallory and Barnsby easily get into the dam control center.
Now we're back with Miller and Weaver. Miller hands Weaver some explosive gel and instructs him to lay it out on the road. And then Miller does the same, and they take cover. A caravan of German trucks comes through, and the explosives do what they were supposed to.
Inside the dam, Barnsby and Mallory continue to move unimpeded through the dam's lower levels.
Back with Miller and Weaver. Miller hands Weaver some wire and tells him to string it up, and Weaver obliges, finding that the end of the wire looks like a cobra. Weaver chuckles and sets it upright into a fallen tree branch and hides as the Chetniks ride by. Dražak's with them, and he's the one who notices the snake, and he dismounts his horse to investigate. He follows the wire and finds the machine gun that Weaver left sitting against a tree. Dražak hears a sound and looks up to see a familiar face. Standing there is Weaver, wielding a knife. Dražak smiles and pulls out his own knife. "Hello, Blackie," he says.
The two fight. Dražak stabs Weaver first, surprised to see that he bleeds red blood. Weaver clocks Dražak with a rock, but as Dražak rises and starts to pull his gun, Weaver leaps over to where his knife has fallen and flings it at Dražak and hits the target, dead in the center of Dražak's abdomen, and the big man finally goes down. Then Miller reappears now that everything between Weaver and Dražak is settled.
At the dam, Barnsby and Mallory are still making their way to the lower levels of the dam, way down. Miller is helping the injured Weaver to safety. They're at a vantage point to see the dam when the explosives go off. Weaver is impatient, but Miller tells him to give them time. They obviously haven't been caught, or they'd have heard the alarms go off.
And we also see that the Germans are really on the move this time. They're going to cross that bridge.
So partisan soldiers are taking their position to defend their side of the bridge.
Meanwhile, Mallory and Barnsby are rigging up the explosives. Outside, Weaver is anxious to see the dam blow, but Miller tells him to be patient.
Barnsby and Mallory get to work setting the explosives. Mallory asks what time the Germans were expected to leave. It's 5:36 a.m. now. Barnsby says they're out of time. And how much time should they give themselves before detonation? 20 seconds? Mallory says that sounds about right. They won't have as far to run. They shake hands, and Barnsby is sorry he won't be able to see the bridge fall. Then the explosions go off.
And the two men are blown down. From his vantage point, Weaver is bitterly disappointed that the explosion didn't do anything. But Miller says these things take time. The partisans then open fire on the Germans on the bridge.
In the dam, we see Barnsby and Mallory have both survived the explosion. Mallory curses Miller that this didn't work, so now that they apparently have failed in their mission, their primary objective is escape. Outside, Weaver is still yelling that it didn't work. Miller tells him that he can't expect a volcano with 3 tiny bags of explosives. Just give it time, and it will work.
Finally, some Germans come down to inspect the site of the explosion. Mallory and Barnsby hide, and then the dam walls start to crack. Water's flowing in. Mallory and Barnsby push past the men, advising them to leave too, and an alarm goes off inside the dam.
From their vantage point, Weaver and Miller watch as the dam breaks and the floods flow forth.
First just a few holes, then it blows completely. Water rushes into the gorge.
We get something of a montage of the damage this flood is doing. The Germans continue their march toward the bridge, as do the floodwaters.
Weaver is celebrating with a less than willing Miller, dancing him around and kissing him on the cheek.
The Germans start crossing the bridge as the waters start to hit it. A few German soldiers try to rush across, but they have to fall back when they are met with partisan gunfire. The plan worked. The force of water starts shaking the bridge. An abandoned tank falls into the newly reformed river, and the bridge collapses, and the partisan soldiers enjoy the show. Even Petrović comes out of his cave to watch.
Mallory and Barnsby rejoin the others. There's much rejoicing until Mallory reminds them that 1. They're on the wrong side of the river. 2. They can't rejoin the partisans. 3. Angry Germans are headed their way, a lot of them. So 4. They have a very long walk home. And that's the end. Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we're talking about Force 10 from Navarone from 1978.
Force 10 from Navarone got its title from the Alistair MacLean book of the same name, but bears so little resemblance to the novel that MacLean loosely adapted part of the screenplay into his 1982 book Partisans.
In a column written by Colin Dangard, published in December of 1978, MacLean seemed to be cautiously optimistic about the adaptation of the book he wrote. He's quoted as saying, "Once a movie company buys your book, you have lost all vestige of control. I'm hopeful that this return to Navarone will be good too, though the storyline bears little resemblance to what I wrote." Then he adds, quote, "This couldn't help but be the best because, with the exception of Guns of Navarone, the rest were rubbish."
There had been plans to produce the film shortly after the 1961 film The Guns of Navarone, with Gregory Peck and David Niven reprising their roles as Mallory and Miller. Following the success of the original film, producer Carl Foreman asked MacLean to write a hardcover sequel novel on which a follow-up film would be based, but the author was reluctant to write an entire novel and instead delivered a screen treatment.
In April of 1967, Foreman announced that he would make a movie called After Navarone for Columbia, with Anthony Quinn, Peck, and Niven returning, and J. Lee Thompson coming back to direct. Then, in May 1967, it was announced that the film title had been changed to The High Dam, and filming would take place in 1969. Meanwhile, MacLean had decided that no film would be forthcoming. He developed the screen treatment into a book and published Force 10 from Navarone in 1968. The novel became a bestseller.
Throughout the 1970s, Foreman tried to get financial backing for the film. In December 1972, MacLean told the Los Angeles Times that Foreman's plan was to use the original cast, but commented, "They'll look a bit old for the war now."
In September 1976, a story in the LA Times reported that Foreman, Oliver Unger, and the German finance company Mondo Films had acquired the screen rights to the novel and screenplay Force 10 from Navarone. Foreman wrote the treatment and served as executive producer, but Unger wound up producing the movie.
In August 1977, the production company set up to make the movie, Navarone Productions, signed an agreement with AIP for the latter to distribute the film. AIP provided $2.1 million of the film's $8.3 million budget. AIP contributed a further $97,000 to produce a U.S. version of the film. Columbia Pictures also put in $2.9 million and bought the exclusive and perpetual distribution rights in all territories outside the United States and Canada. ABC Television paid $1 million for the broadcast television rights. Filming went over budget, ballooning to more than $10 million, though. The production company's completion guarantor had to step in and provide additional funds.
In an article by Desmond Ryan in the Philadelphia Inquirer about AIP financing big-budget films like Force 10 and the movie Meteor, Samuel Arkoff is quoted as saying, "For years, I have been berating the narcissistic producers who insisted that sheer size was enough. Put in this expensive star, put in this expensive writer, and churn with this expensive director. I call that stuffing bananas with bananas, and only too frequently do you get a banana split instead of a picture."
Unger and director Guy Hamilton headed a 5-member team to scout locations for Force 10 in Pakistan, according to a January 1977 Variety article. Unger signed an agreement to shoot in western Pakistan in winter 1977, and Pakistan's state-run film agency was prepared to provide partial financing for a co-production, or just a location shooting deal, but the final terms proved too costly for the Pakistani government. Rather than revise the script to account for the location change and also to receive less money, Unger and the director's company, Guy Hamilton Productions, chose to shoot in Europe, according to an article in Daily Variety in early January 1978.
The cast had been set by October of 1977. Just as a side note, Caroline Munro said she was offered the part of Maritza, but she turned it down due to the nudity. Filming took 5 months. The indoor scenes were shot at Shepperton Studios outside London, and sets included a full-scale mock-up of a Lancaster bomber. The exteriors were shot around the Dražaka Pera Bridge, Montenegro, and the dam on Jablanica Lake in Jablanica, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Scale models of the dam, valley, and bridge were built at the Mediterranean Film Studios in Malta.
Oliver Unger told the Chicago Tribune that Yugoslavia's President Tito, referenced in the film, authorized his government's assistance with the film. He provided 2,000 soldiers as extras, as well as uniforms and equipment and several Yugoslavian Army T-34 tanks. Both Tito and MacLean visited the set during filming.
Unger said that to get the dramatic views of the bridge overlooking the Tara River, they had to use trucks, donkeys, and yoked oxen and wooden sleds to get the equipment up steep mountain roads to the remote location. The scenes at the train yard were shot at the Royal Navy Dockyard in Plymouth, England, and on Jersey in the Channel Islands. The logo seen on the train carriage, PSTO, and in parentheses, stood for Principal Supply and Transport Officer, Navy.
In a syndicated column published in December of 1978, Carl Weathers said he and Robert Shaw became very special friends on set. He helped me a great deal, at times my link to sanity in some of those primitive locations where we spent weeks at a time. The food was so terrible we found ourselves knocking off a bottle of vodka between takes, and he really regaled me with some fantastic stories.
Shaw was not happy on set, though. In another syndicated article by Colin Dangard, Shaw admitted to not wanting to act anymore. He said, quote, "I've been seriously thinking that this might be my last film." He then claimed that he was still working because his expenses, which included caring for his 10 children, were $10,000 a week. He continued, quote, "I no longer have anything real to say. I am appalled at some of the lines. I never write them myself. I'm always running with guns. As Robert Mitchum would say, this is another running, falling down, getting up again picture." Shaw died in August of 1978 before Force 10 was released.
Barbara Bach told Bob Lardine in the New York Daily News in a December 1978 column, "I know I have a reputation as a glamour girl, but in the upcoming movie, Force 10, I wear baggy clothes, I have muddle over my face, and shun cosmetics. Nobody is going to think me gorgeous in the picture, and that will make me deliriously happy. I'm hoping that some people will walk away from the movie saying, you know, she can really act."
Richard Kiel told the Los Angeles Times in January of 1978 that he became a popular figure among the Yugoslavian crew and the curious onlookers on location. They joked about his height, and although he learned some of the language, the crew started mimicking his Yugoslavian accent during filming. He said in a January 1978 column by Vernon Scott that, quote, "I've got a top role in Force 10 from Navarone. Instead of the usual villain, I play a two-dimensional man who eventually does become the heavy." Two-dimension. "I'm equally billed for the first time with people like Robert Shaw, Harrison Ford, and Franco Nero, and that's important to me as an actor, to establish my name in the public eye," end quote. And he also admitted that some people got him confused with statuesque actor Ted Cassidy.
The script for Force 10 was being revised as filming went on, according to an interview with Edward Fox in the LA Times. The action had been laid down, but the characters were still stick figures. We had to dress them up and make the lines fit them as we went along. Fox said there were 5 people tasked with doctoring the script. We don't know all 5, but we know, thanks again to the LA Times, that Director Hamilton brought in George MacDonald Fraser to help, as the two of them had gotten along while working on Superman the movie. Robin Chapman said in a 2002 letter to the London Times that Fraser only made minor dialogue changes.
While most references to Force 10 from Navarone acknowledge it as a sequel to The Guns of Navarone, news items in the August 10, 1978 Hollywood Reporter and the September 15th edition of Variety characterized Force 10 from Navarone as a continuation that used some of the same characters and locations.
Although several sources, including an advertisement in the August 21, 1978 issue of Box Office Magazine, named Samuel Z. Arkoff as a producer, and a news item in a December 1976 issue of Variety noted that Jeffrey Reeve joined the production as a producer, neither man receives on-screen credit.
Force 10 from Navarone was released on December 7, 1978. The runtime of the release version was 118 minutes, and the restored version of the film is 126 minutes long. Before its official release, though, the film was screened for then-President Jimmy Carter at Camp David on Thanksgiving of 1978.
Toy ads in newspapers in December of 1978 featured a Navarone playset based on the Guns of Navarone movie setting, but undoubtedly timed to capitalize on the release of Force 10 from Navarone so close to Christmas that year. The set retailed at around $15.
That's $1978.
Fawcett Publishing released a novelization of Force 10 from Navarone with cover art taken from the movie poster before the movie was released.
The Marines used the movie as a way to drive donations for their Toys for Tots program. Several papers reported that a toy donation could be given in lieu of a ticket purchase at participating theaters. Some of AIP's promotional suggestions for theater owners, in addition to toy drives, were for theater owners to stage a, quote, commando-style toy raid at a local or chain toy store, giving kids a short time frame in which to scour the store looking for specially marked items, perhaps even the aforementioned Navarone playset. Kids who completed the mission could be awarded the toys they found and a family admission to Force 10 from Navarone.
Another idea AIP offered was called Boom Boom Bally, where a local military installation or the police or fire department would hold a demonstration of demolitions or explosives. Theater owners would then use clips from Force 10 or other movie promotional items to drive ticket sales.
Taglines for Force 10 from Navarone include, "The odds against them were 10,000 to 1, but what the hell?"
Explosive High Adventure, a mission more daring than silencing the guns.
Not since the Guns of Navarone has there been a force like Force 10 from Navarone.
Force 10 from Navarone earned $3.2 million at the box office, reportedly a quarter of what the Guns of Navarone made.
And I'm not sure if the amount was adjusted for inflation.
In January of 1982, Variety reported that Filmways Pictures Incorporated sued Unger's estate for the recovery of a $25,000 loan he borrowed against the proceeds of Force 10 from Navarone. The lawsuit stated with interest a total of $29,260 was owed. The outcome of the legal action is unknown.
In another lawsuit, the estates of Carl Foreman, Sidney Cohn, and Oliver Unger and surviving producer Peter Gettinger sued Sony Pictures, owner of Columbia Pictures, for unpaid sums from distribution rights. Following a May 2008 trial in the New York Supreme Court, a judgment awarded the producers more than 30 years of funds withheld by Columbia Pictures. Sony appealed, but an appellate court upheld the initial verdict in September of 2009.
Harrison Ford has said of Force 10, "It wasn't a bad film. There were honest people involved and it was an honest effort, but it wasn't the right thing for me to do."
Tom Buckley in the New York Times wrote, "The plot of Force 10 is banally improbable. Guy Hamilton's direction is sluggish, and the camera work by Chris Chalice makes the least of the picturesque locations in the mountains of Montenegro. There is, moreover, an unmistakable air of haste and cost-cutting that suggests most of the production budget went to pay the high-priced stars. Force 10, in passing, considerably romanticizes the activity of the partisans, the irregular troops commanded by Marshal Tito, who has been the freely chosen president of Yugoslavia for 32 years now, as of 1978, and turns the Chetniks, who were linked to the Yugoslavian royalist government in exile in London, into eager Nazi collaborators. And historically, that might not have been true, but we're not sure."
Roger Ebert wrote in the Chicago Sun-Times, "Force 10 honors all the obligatory cliches, and then there's a nice twist involving the explosion inside the dam, and then we get the special effects, and then it's over. It doesn't leave much of an impression. A director like Guy Hamilton, a graduate of 4 of the Bond pictures, can turn out action movies like this in his sleep. This time, alas, that's apparently what he did."
Gary Arnold in the Washington Post wrote, "If anyone made a respectable effort to invest the story with authenticity or tension, it is not apparent on the screen. Even the big spectacle, the demolition of the dam, is going to look unimpressive to moviegoers who've already been to Superman and seen the identical illusion depicted with far more skill. Force 10 is a mission that probably should have been aborted. Instead, it's been allowed to abort on the screen."
David Anson in Newsweek also jumped on the negative review train. "Force 10 is funny, but not quite funny enough. Too often one laughs at its implausibilities without knowing if the filmmakers are in on the joke. The old-fashioned script by Robin Chapman has just enough tongue-in-cheek so that the cliches can be taken as irony, but Guy Hamilton's direction tips the balance toward cliché. An old hand in engineering actors in and out of impossible pickles, Hamilton keeps the action going, but the surprises are so mechanically executed that they rarely amaze."
Anthony Rocha in the Saginaw News wrote that because of a banal storyline and the sluggish camera work, the elements of an entertaining war adventure are not blended well. And he continued, "The choppy quality of the film leaves an air of waste and cost-cutting, which was surely transferred to meeting the cost of the cast."
In contrast, the Variety review was uniformly positive. Director Guy Hamilton manages over the course of almost 2 hours to keep his audience on edge. For a finale, he has a double whammy destruction of a giant Yugoslav dam, which sets loose forces of nature that crumble a seemingly indestructible bridge. Harrison Ford does a creditable job as the American colonel. Fox is excellent as the British demolitions expert. Carl Weathers gives a powerful performance as the unwanted black GI who proves himself in more ways than one. Barbara Bach, lone femme, does fine in a tragic patriotic role as a partisan. Franco Nero as a Nazi double agent who fools the partisans is slickly nefarious.
So I'm wondering, what's your review, Jeff? How do you feel about Force 10 from Navarone?
The one thing that I really noticed about this movie is that it might be sent during wartime, but what this is a caper movie.
Oh, absolutely.
And I love a good caper movie. I love it when a plan comes together.
Even when it falls apart, bit by bit, it still comes back together. It's more akin to Ocean's 11 than it is to your average war movie. And Ocean's 11 is a lot of fun. And I thought this movie was kind of fun too. I honestly don't get all the negative reviews of it. It seems like they're really piling on things that I didn't really think were problems. The problems in this movie, to me, were some holes in the script that didn't make sense. At one point, Captain Lescovar says the Germans are coming tomorrow morning, and then 2 or 3 nights pass before they actually come. And that would be understandable, except at one point, Barnsby says, well, the Germans are always punctual. So they're a couple of days late, and that's just not like them. So there are a few plot holes. I wonder why the demolitions expert isn't inside the dam setting up the demolitions. I kind of wonder what he was doing at all at the end of the movie. They had to kill Dražak somehow, but he didn't really do anything to make that happen. But apart from those plot holes, I thought this was an enjoyable movie.
Yeah, I don't feel that Dražak really had to die in this film for it to still be successful. They brought him back, and I'm not even sure of the geography of this place because all this action seems to happen within a 5-mile radius. They have the Germans right on the other side of the bridge. They have the partisans. The Chetniks are not all that far away.
No, it's walking distance, even if it's a long walk. I think we're just not supposed to worry about a lot of these nitpicks.
It's far enough, though, they have to take a train through the night to get back to the dam. So,
well, they had to go to the supply dump, which was a totally different location than we'd ever been to before.
Okay, yeah, we don't know how far that was.
Right. It took them from dawn, apparently, to late at night to get there, from what I could tell.
It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you think about it a little bit, because this train went...
And we don't know how long the train took to get them where they were going either. But
well, it was night when they left, and it was daylight when they jumped.
Right.
Which was supposedly a half a mile from the dam, if they're calculated correctly. But they were on the German side of the gorge still, so...
And the next scene is night. So we don't know how long that walk took to get to the dam.
Well, it's actually really early the next morning. It's just still dark.
Right. The timing doesn't make sense. If you were putting this into like a spreadsheet, you'd be like, well, what happened in this 24 hours? You said this was happening the next day, and it doesn't happen for 3 days. And somebody could have combed through the script and tightened that up a lot.
But to get back to my point, Dražak could have just been ignored and allowed to live, and it wouldn't have affected the story at all. I guess it's just that as a villain, he needs to have his comeuppance, and so that had to be part of the script.
I guess he didn't really directly kill anybody that starred in the movie, but he did rough up Maritza.
And insulted Weathers.
That's true. And he stabbed him. I mean, he didn't have to stop and get out and look for the snake.
He only stabbed him because he was brought back to be killed. I mean, if they had just left him in the Chetnik camp and never thought about him again, because how many soldiers or whatever are going to be left behind and never thought of again because you're just going on with your mission?
Well, it's hard to forget Richard Kiel. I'm sure you can agree with that.
Yeah, it was really hard to see him get kicked in the shins because I saw him at a few conventions toward the end of his life, and his legs were not strong. He couldn't support his own weight. If you see him in Billy Madison, he makes an appearance, and he's either leaning on somebody or leaning on a fence or just shot from the shoulders up because he couldn't stand. He couldn't support his own weight. He was riding around on a scooter.
You can't imagine that's a stunt double that went down in his place.
Well, I'm sure it's fortified or something,
or fake.
Or a fake leg.
Yeah, or he'd fake the kick. It wasn't a real kick.
But regardless, it's still hard to watch. There were a lot of conveniences in this story. The fact that there were a couple of Chetniks who were bandaged, which is a plot device because they were actually agents. But one would think you might be a little more suspicious that these people just showed up with bandages and said, hey, we're on your side.
Right, after they've been gone for a long time and they disappeared escorting prisoners who didn't come back. Somebody should have looked into that. Also, we say they were bandaged, but it was really just like a bag over their heads.
Well, they refer to it as bandaged.
Right.
But I guess the advantage is you can swap those guys out and give them a break, and then nobody would even question it because the Chetniks aren't that bright.
Well, that made the Chetniks look really stupid for allowing themselves to be fooled so easily by their own plan.
But it definitely worked for the story because they took advantage of that when they infiltrated the Chetnik camp to
rescue Miller,
rescue the prisoners,
etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can nitpick this movie to pieces. So let's talk about the things that we did like.
I'm not done nitpicking.
Oh, okay.
I watched this and I wondered why the prisoners that were left in the Chetnik camp, Miller, Reynolds, and Weaver, why they hadn't been killed. And they explained because, well, they hadn't been interrogated yet. But if that was the reason that they were still alive, why did they line up all 5 of them in front of the firing squad in the first place? Was it just to scare them?
Possibly. I think that was probably a common Nazi tactic of always making people on edge, never letting them know where they stand. But they never explain anything, so you just have to make up your own explanations as you watch this. And it did seem kind of callous that Mallory didn't care what happened to Miller after they were separated.
I don't think it was that he didn't care. I just felt that he
knew he couldn't do anything.
He couldn't do anything about it. Yeah, I mean, the two of them can't march back into the camp on their own and rescue them.
Right, but he could have said, "We're going to go back. Whatever it takes, we'll get if we can." I don't know.
Well, if you're on a mission like this, you're going to have
losses,
collateral damage,
and obviously we got a lot of that in the beginning of the movie. That was a really badly planned mission. They're in this cardboard airplane, and as soon as they encounter one German plane, 98% of the crew is dead.
Yeah, I don't know how many members were in Force 10, but it's just...
There's at least a dozen men in the back of the
Barnsby and Reynolds
plane
by the time they hit the ground, and the two tag-alongs.
Right, and Weaver, who wasn't supposed to be there. So I think when Colonel Barnsby gets back, he's going to have some splaining to do.
I'm not sure they're going to make it back.
Well, that's true. We don't find out, and there is no third movie. Is there anything you really liked about this movie?
I like the characters in this movie. There's something about a British accent and just remaining calm in all adversity that is so cool. James Bond does that.
Yeah.
And Miller definitely presented that. And I imagine, I haven't seen The Guns of Navarone, but I could see David Niven portraying the character in a very similar way.
Oh, he's so elegant. Yeah, I really love the character of Miller. I think he was my favorite in the whole movie. But I liked Mallory too, and I liked the two of them together. In fact, I don't think we even really needed anybody else in the movie besides them. Well, I take that back. I like Carl Weathers too. He was a lot of fun. But Harrison Ford, I think they could have put anybody in that role.
Yeah, and if you read interviews with him, he probably felt the same way.
Right. It's funny because that was right after Star Wars came out that he started working on this movie. His star was really rising at this point, although he couldn't have known that probably when he signed on for the movie. So it was a big deal to have him here, and he was probably a big reason why the movie made any money, even though it was essentially a flop.
I don't know if he mentioned it, but the version we watched was 125-minute version of the film, but apparently when originally released, it was 118 minutes.
Yeah, we did mention that actually, but we didn't say which one we watched.
And I don't know what I would have cut from this.
I don't know about that. I think there was a lot of scenes that seemed kind of repetitive. They could have tightened it up a little bit. Like you said, the scene with Dražak getting killed wasn't really necessary. That could have been cut or shortened or done at a different time.
Okay, I'll give you that one. That one could have been cut, and it just wouldn't have given Weathers the satisfaction of killing the guy who insulted him earlier.
That's true.
But it didn't need to be there.
And maybe a lot of the setup could have been tightened up a bit, although we did have to reintroduce the characters. But there was like at least 3 minutes of Guns of Navarone footage that we saw. And a lot of it did make sense because they didn't use the characters that David Niven portrayed. And
well, because they look drastically different in this movie.
Obviously, they couldn't use them.
Yeah, the footage that they use is all pretty generic. It's explosions and
they could have
officers
made that
giving orders and
holding their hands over their ears as things explode. And then the whole island goes up. So they could have just put like one paragraph of text on screen and skipped all that. We did see, though, at the end of that, they put in Robert Shaw and Edward Fox getting picked up after the mission's over. So that establishes them as Miller and Mallory. Whereas you might not have known that had you seen Guns of Navarone, that they're the same characters. They must have felt they needed to bridge that somehow.
I think that was a successful way of doing it. I just don't know that the footage from Guns of Navarone really explained anything because it was all very generic.
Well, obviously, a lot of things have to go wrong when you have a plan. They're expecting supplies, but the supply drop is compromised. They want to blow up the bridge, but the bridge is indestructible. So they always have to keep thinking on their feet. What are they going to do next now that this terrible thing has happened? So I guess that part is important. I just think they could have just tightened it up a little bit.
Yeah, and with the locations being what they were, and I'm talking the actual locations within the film, not where they shot, but the Chetnik camp being a day's walk from the partisan camp, part of Force 10's mission was to deliver Mallory and Miller to the partisan camp. And they thought they got a shortcut when the fake partisans came to meet them, but they were Chetniks, not stinking partisans. And by the time this all plays out, Force 10 is really down to one original member of his team. So the fact that their mission was successful is kind of a miracle.
Well, it is, and that's part of the fun of it, I guess.
What about the special effects? One of those reviews said that it was unimpressive compared to the dam breaking in Superman, the movie.
Okay, well, full disclosure, the last time I saw Superman, the movie, was probably in the 1980s. And I saw this just yesterday. So I can't tell you whether Superman is that much better. Do you remember?
Well, I don't know that I'm not still looking at Superman through the eyes of a 7-year-old. It seems really impressive. I thought this was impressive too, but this is more, I don't know how to describe it, but more majestic or magical. It looks like a Disney flood kind of, because the water's flowing down and it's doing what it's supposed to do.
It's going up and down the sides of the gorge. And
yeah, it looks beautiful, but it doesn't look damaging.
Yeah, I thought the miniature work is really good. We heard in one of the film commentaries that it was filmed outside. So that sunlight beating down as opposed to studio lighting really made it look more realistic. But you're right. We were both watching. I mean, I said it first. I don't see how that much water, which wasn't more than just like a pretty heavy rainfall would have given them, could have destroyed that bridge. They said it was reinforced to 20 feet below ground level with concrete pillars. And just one rushing gush of water, I'm not sure that would have destroyed it. They don't dam up the water so it doesn't destroy the bridge. They dam up the water for the hydroelectric power. So it just didn't really make sense that that would have done that much damage. However, we have to say, well, that was in the script. And
well, it worked because we'd still be watching the movie or just everybody would be dead. And
the Germans would have won World War II. And God knows we don't want Nazis in charge.
But I probably wouldn't have even considered those were miniatures if I was just looking at that.
No, it's really well done.
When you shoot a miniature like that in water, you shoot it obviously close up, but in ultra high speed. So when it plays back, the water looks like it's slower. And these look like waves. They didn't look like ripples.
No, it didn't look like bathtub water. It looked like an actual raging river. It just didn't seem like enough water that would have destroyed this bridge. And you'd have to see the movie to know what we're talking about. This bridge is huge. It's like 20 stories off the ground. And the water came up to, I want to say ankle height on the bottom of the bridge. It wasn't like at bridge level. It hit the pillars hard, but hard enough? It's hard to say. I don't think so.
It didn't look like it would because it looked like it was barely coming over the rocks that it's embedded in.
Right. Like I said, ankle height. An ankle high river wouldn't knock me over. Well, it might. I'm not that steady on my feet. All right. We've said a lot about this movie. Other people have said a lot about this movie. I think it's time we give it our rating. Using our AIP scale, A, awesome, I, intermediate, P, pathetic. How do you rate Force 10 from Navarone, Jeff?
Well, as I said, I love a good caper movie, and this was a caper movie. There always might be a loss of some characters trying to pull off a mission like this, but the characters that we lost, we never really had a chance to get attached to.
Right. Reynolds.
Yeah, Reynolds, and even Marco, who
never spoke.
Yeah, he never spoke. He just kind of tagged along once they reached the partisans. But the other guys who were in Force 10 who never even made it off the plane, we don't know anything about them. We don't even know their names.
They were rude to Weaver. We know that much.
So that might have made this a stronger film, not necessarily a better film, but a stronger film if someone that we cared about in this movie lost their lives. But the characters that we're meant to care about all survive.
Well, there is a point where we think Mallory and Barnsby are dead. They think they're dead. They think by blowing up this dam, they have sacrificed their lives. So there is a moment.
The only death that we might mourn ourselves is probably Maritza.
That's true. She was a good guy.
But we're not that attached to her.
No, she did kiss a Nazi. But it was all part of the job.
But despite all the bad reviews, I thought this was a really good movie. I enjoyed watching it every time I had to go over it. And I'm giving this one a full-on A. What do you think, Cheryl?
Well, I have to first say, I never in my life have chosen to watch a war movie. I just don't enjoy them very much. But as you very rightly pointed out, this is a caper movie disguised as a war movie. And as such, it had a different element. We're not just on the battlefield shooting back and forth at each other.
No, the battles are all small. They're just fights. They're not even
skirmishes.
Not even that, because usually they're 1-on-1 or 5-on-5 or something. It's not, or 5-on-10. It's the small battles. It's jailbreaks and escapes and stuff like that, or just 1-on-1 like in Weaver and Dražak. It's not, okay, we'll set up our defense, you set up your defense, and we're going to go against each other and see who comes out of this alive.
We ride at dawn. No, nothing like that. So that added an element of, dare I say, fun to the movie, where we're sitting there seeing all the obstacles they're facing, wondering how they're going to work it out, and they do, and then it's successful, and everybody's happy at the end. It's not a perfect ending because they're still in a lot of trouble where they are. They're alone. There's little chance they'll make it back. But it's still a happy ending because, well, the Germans didn't get to cross the river.
For the 70s, this is a pretty happy ending.
Right, exactly. And I really enjoyed it. And I was surprised. I was not planning to enjoy this movie. And I don't know, like when I do plan to enjoy a movie and I don't, I feel bad. When I don't plan to enjoy a movie and I do, I'm really happy. And I give it an A too.
Wow.
Were you surprised?
I don't know. I was probably an I the first time through.
I was wondering where I was. I wasn't sure.
But the more I thought about it, the more I enjoyed it. And it drove it up in my eyes.
No, I agree. And always when we watch the movie the first time, we're just watching it. And then the next time we watch it, we're taking notes and we're picking apart the plot and we're discussing it with our, back and forth, scene by scene, instead of just enjoying it. So that can either make you really hate the movie because you're bogged down in all these idiotic details, or it can make you really like it. In this case, it made both of us like it more than we did before. It just had something that made it very watchable. I would recommend this to anybody, even people who don't like war movies.
And just as a reminder, we have a website, AIPpod.com, where you can listen to the podcast. You can find things that we can't show you in an audio medium. We have posters and lobby cards, trailers available for you to watch of all the movies we've talked about. And hopefully soon we'll have some that we haven't even talked about yet.
And there's a way to contact us if you want to recommend a movie, if you want to compliment us, complain about something, or just comment on anything that we've said. Come to AIPPOD.com. We've completed our mission of talking about Force 10 from Navarone. For the American International Podcast, I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.